So I just spent the afternoon in Toronto at Profusion, and Profusion is basically like this big industry event for people who are interested in like cameras and video and audio and all that kind of stuff. All the big brands were there. You know, you had Sony and Canon, Fujifilm, Olympus, sorry, OM System, DZO Lab, Hollyland, Atomos, Blackmagic, all of them, including Nikon. I went specifically because my buddy Taylor was doing a talk at the Nikon booth, and it was very cool to see how many people were at Nikon. People love Nikon. Huh. For a while, Nikon just had like a lot of undue like hate, I would say, which is sort of strange. I don't think they earned it, but be that as it may, it's kind of a new era for Nikon. And I want to talk about basically the reasons I think people do love Nikon and why the people who love it are so dedicated to Nikon. Reason number one, and this should be the reason people like a brand, is their legacy of quality. In every iteration of what Nikon has been since they started, they have had like inarguably great cameras and lenses. Not every single camera and lens is great, I know, but the lion's share of the things they put out have been pretty great quality products. And you can go back into their film, you can look at their early days in digital, you can look at their current system, and you can find excellent bodies and lenses across the board. And that's really cool. And that means that somebody who invested well into Nikon early on has continually had that decision be sort of further solidified over these years as Nikon has continued to be the kind of company that they thought they were, which was a quality company. No matter what era you got into Nikon, there was great quality. Whether that was, you know, getting into something really, really accessibly priced or high-end, you had good quality stuff, or at least stuff that could get you started if you were brand new and it wouldn't be completely terrible. I think Nikon's done a good job of treating people well, and their legacy of quality has taken them to where they are now, where the people who did stick with them really feel like that decision has been like justified. Reason number two, more specifically, I would say, is their lens mount and their lenses. So what's kind of cool is that basically right up until the Z mount, if you wanted to get into Nikon, you could use pretty much all of their lenses without having to have an adapter, which is very, very cool. So if you were shooting on like a Nikon D850, the last DSLR that they created, you could use lenses from way far back and still have great quality. And that's very, very cool. And that's something that, you know, obviously like Sony couldn't do that because they didn't have that legacy. They didn't have, you know, lenses from that long ago. Canon could have done that, but Canon switched their mount a couple of times. So of the big three at least, this was something that was kind of unique to Nikon, and I think that's why a lot of people were excited about it. Not only that, but Nikon made some absolutely superior glass over the years in many different iterations. Going back to film all the way to current, they have always had certain lenses that are just incredible. And so that means that if you were the type of person who invested in your lens system, then again, you were just so well set up in the future if you wanted to change bodies. I think that whole idea of like buy the great lenses and then you can change bodies whenever you want is exemplified best with Nikon. Reason number three is the upgrade pathway. What's cool about Nikon, and I would say a lot of camera companies at this point do something similar, but Nikon has kind of always done this, they have a great upgrade pathway through lenses and bodies. So when you first start shooting, back in the film days, or if you were getting into their DSLR or into the mirrorless system, you had a really accessibly priced camera at that lower tier, as well as like accessibly priced lenses. And the Z mount has taken a little while to make this kind of all happen, but it still is the case with the Z mount. Like something like the Z50 or the Z30 or the, you know, Z5, those kind of things were like priced in a way that still made them accessible and they were still pretty good quality. And then you had a logical step moving up from there. So if you were in the DSLR days and you wanted to go from like a smaller, cheaper crop sensor into a full frame, you could do that. Or if you wanted to go with like a more entry-level full frame right up to the professional levels, you could do that. And it was the same with their film cameras. So like, you know, you had like the F-series cameras that were more accessibly priced, and then you had the more like professional ones. It's very, very cool, and I think that they've always done a good job of having a natural pathway to keep people in their system. So if you felt like you wanted something more, you didn't have to abandon the company you were already working with and all that glass and all that kind of stuff. The upgrade system is there, and I think that that's something that has helped people just feel confident about buying into Nikon, even at the times when it has not been cool to use Nikon. And it's starting to get cool again, so that's nice, I guess. Reason number four, Nikon listens to their customers. One thing that's really cool about Nikon is that I think as the years have progressed, they have, generally speaking, listened to what their customers want and tried to satisfy their customer base. They've tried new things, they've done different things, not everybody's gonna like everything. But at the core of it, I would say they have known who their customer base is, and they have continually tried to release cameras and lenses and other things that really speak to that core demographic of what they're looking to satisfy. And so that's really cool, because sometimes you have a brand that you feel like just does like a total 180, and all of a sudden you're like, I thought this brand was all about the same things I'm about, and they understood what we wanted, and then that just doesn't happen. I think there was a while there where people were feeling frustrated with Fujifilm, for example, because it felt like maybe they were getting a little bit away from photo, which was like what everybody really felt like they were so tied into. And that whole history of Kaizen, like continually updating and getting better, seemed to fall by the wayside for a little while they just released a ton of cameras. And I think some of their customer base may have felt a bit abandoned, which is too bad. I think they've kind of rectified that, and they're starting to do that more. But I mean, Nikon's also a great example of like, they're very good about that whole like Kaizen approach. They don't call it that, but they continually update things and try and make things better and better, which is very cool. So I think they do a good job of listening to their customers, and that's keeping people loyal. Reason number 5 is ergonomics and build quality. These things are built like tanks, and they weigh just as much. I know, they're heavy, but they are just really, really well built. They're strong, they hold up, they're durable. And I think what's kind of cool too is like if you go back even to like the sort of pro film bodies right up to now, there's a design language that has carried through relatively well. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. And I think, like, okay, if you were to pick up the Nikon Z8 and then you were to hold it and use it, and then you were to pick up the D800, you wouldn't feel like you're picking up a camera that it has nothing to do with the other one. You would understand the sort of lineage of that design language, and I think they've done a great job of that. So what that means is that people naturally feel comfortable using their cameras if they started with a Nikon. So if you picked up a Nikon, my first digital camera I bought was the Nikon D80. And that camera, it's small and it's a crop sensor. It's not the same thing as the Z8, but I can still hold the Z8 and kind of remember what it felt like to hold the D80, which is kind of cool. The first full frame Nikon camera I got was the D800. And that for sure, I think there is a consistency there. And that's cool if you're somebody who likes that. If you don't like it, then you're not going to like the cameras because they're going to continue to feel that way. And that's a different question for you, I guess. But hey, overall, built like tanks, the ergonomics feel really good, and if you like them, you love them. Reason number 6 is all to do with the fact that I think they're kind of like the underdogs, in a way. Of the big 3 at least, you have Sony, Canon, and Nikon. Nikon is the smallest, and they are the most dogged on, for sure. Like, I think there was like a long time of people talking about just Nikon's not being very good when it comes to like autofocus, and people didn't like the fact that they were a bit bigger and bulkier when everything was getting sleeker and smaller. Overall, I think like Nikon has just kind of been kind of shit on. I don't know. People have not been nice to Nikon. None of the brands have necessarily had people be nice to them. You could pick up any one thing about a brand and say like, oh, like Sony was shit on for their colors for the longest time, or Canon, everybody is upset about the fact that like they haven't opened up their lens mount. Yeah, for sure. And there's fair criticisms for all the brands, including Nikon. But I think generally Nikon performs way better than people give it credit to, because most of those people are getting that information from people who probably haven't spent time with a Nikon in a long time. So if you're somebody who likes Nikon, you probably feel really convicted in the idea that like, no, this is great and people need to know about that. And to be honest, when I switched to Nikon this last year, I was sort of like, all cameras are good now. It doesn't really matter. I worked in a camera store, so I knew that. But what was interesting was I wasn't ready for how excited people would get when I started shooting Nikon. I started making content about Nikon. People love it. People really love it. And I appreciate that, and that's why I keep making it. And so let me know if you want to keep seeing Nikon content. I'm definitely going to make stuff about other brands too, like I always do, but it's been very cool going down this journey. And on that note, I'm actually considering starting a second channel that's going to be all about basically like finance for new and burgeoning freelance creators. Something that is kind of near and dear to my heart. I love talking about that kind of stuff. I find it really fascinating, and I also think it's something we just don't talk about enough in the creative space. So if that's something that you think would be interesting, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know if that's something you would subscribe to, or if it's something you have zero interest in, just also let me know and just give me some feedback. And let me know too, what is it you love most about Nikon? Okay, we'll talk soon. Peace.